The doorbell rang like a gunshot through my quiet apartment, shattering the silence I'd grown too comfortable with. I froze, my hand hovering over the half-empty coffee mug, my heart inexplicably racing. It was just the internet guy, I told myself, but something about the sound felt like the universe knocking. I'm Elias Navarro, 29, a graphic designer who'd moved to Portland, Oregon, 6 months ago after a breakup that left me hollowed out. My old life in Chicago, friends, routines, love, felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my new one. I opened the door to find him. Theo Carter, 27, with tousled blonde hair, a tool belt slung low on his hips, and eyes that seemed to see more than they should. He was here to install my Wi-Fi, a mundane task that, unbeknownst to either of us, would unravel everything. Elias, right? Theo's voice was warm, like a campfire crackling on a chilly night. He extended a hand, and I shook it, noticing the calluses on his palm. Evidence of a life built with his hands. Let's get you connected. The apartment was small, a one-bedroom with exposed brick walls, and a view of the Willamette River that I rarely appreciated anymore. Theo moved with easy confidence, setting up his tools on my living room floor, his presence filling the space in a way that made it hard to focus. I hovered awkwardly, pretending to tidy up while stealing glances at him. There was something disarming about Theo, not just his looks, though those didn't hurt, but the way he seemed to carry a quiet strength, like he'd seen enough of the world to know its sharp edges but chose to stay soft anyway. "So, you new to Portland?" he asked, crouched by the router, his fingers deftly untangling wires. "Yeah, 6 months," I said, leaning against the counter, still figuring it out. He glanced up, his blue eyes catching the light. "Takes time. This city's got a way of sneaking up on you. You'll find your place." His words landed heavier than they should have. My place. I hadn't found it in Chicago, not really, and I wasn't sure I'd find it here. My last relationship with a guy named Ryan had ended in a slow, agonizing drift, me pulling away, him begging me to stay, both of us too broken to fix it. I'd come to Portland to start over, but all I'd done was trade one kind of loneliness for another. Theo worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the hum of his tools and the occasional chirp of my phone. I watched him, trying to pin down why he felt so familiar, like a song I'd heard once and couldn't forget. Maybe it was the way he moved, deliberate but unhurried, or the way he'd hum softly to himself when he thought I wasn't listening. It was a melody I didn't recognize, but it stirred something in me, something I'd buried deep. "All right," he said, standing and dusting off his jeans. "You're online. Wanna test it?" I grabbed my laptop, and we sat on the couch, closer than necessary. The screen loaded flawlessly, and I laughed, more out of relief than anything else. "You're a miracle worker." "Nah," he said, grinning. "Just good with wires. People are trickier." I raised an eyebrow. "You fix people too?" His grin faltered, just for a second, and I caught a flicker of something. Pain, maybe, or a story he wasn't ready to tell. "Not usually," he said, his voice quieter now. "But I've been known to try." That was the moment I felt it. The spark. Not the kind that burns bright and fast, but the slow, steady kind that warms you from the inside out. Theo wasn't just here to install my internet. He was here to remind me what it felt like to be seen. Over the next hour, we talked more than we should have. He told me about growing up in a small town in Idaho, where being openly gay wasn't just hard, it was dangerous. He'd left at 18, chasing freedom and finding it in bits and pieces across the Pacific Northwest. I told him about Chicago, about Ryan, about the weight of starting over. It was easy to talk to Theo, like slipping into a favorite sweater, and by the time he packed up his tools, I didn't want him to leave. "Hey," I said as he reached the door. "If I have any, internet issues, can I call you?" He turned, his smile soft but knowing. "You've got my number," he said, tapping the work order on the counter. "Use it." And then he was gone, leaving my apartment feeling both fuller and emptier than before. I sat on the couch, staring at the router's blinking lights, wondering if I'd just imagined the connection between us. But the note he'd left, the standard technician slip with his name and number, felt like a lifeline. I tucked it into my pocket, not ready to let go of the possibility it held. That night I couldn't sleep. Theo's voice echoed in my head, his words about finding my place looping like a refrain. I didn't know it yet, but he was already rewiring something deeper, something I thought was permanently offline. The next morning, I woke up with Theo's number burning a hole in my pocket. I told myself it was ridiculous to call him so soon. Internet was fine after all, but by noon, I was pacing my apartment, thumb hovering over his contact. What was I even doing? I hadn't felt this kind of nervous energy since I was a teenager, crushing on the quarterback who never looked my way. Finally, I texted him, "Hey, it's Elias. Internet's great, but any chance you're free for coffee?" I hit send before I could overthink it, then stared at my phone like it might explode. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Coffee sounds good. Tomorrow, 2 p.m.? There's a place on Belmont, the Brood Awakening." I grinned like an idiot, relief flooding me. It wasn't a date, not exactly, but it was something. I spent the rest of the day sketching, my pencil moving across the page with a freedom I hadn't felt in months. Theo had already shifted something in me, and I wasn't sure whether to be thrilled or terrified. The Brood Awakening was a quirky coffee shop with mismatched chairs and walls covered in local art. Theo was already there when I arrived, sitting by a window with a mug of black coffee. He looked different out of his work uniform, jeans, a faded flannel, and a beanie that made him look younger, almost boyish. My heart did a stupid little flip. "Hey," he said, standing as I approached. "You made it." "Barely," I admitted, sliding into the seat across from him. "Got lost twice. Portland's streets are a maze." He laughed, and it was the kind of sound that could make you forget your own name. "You'll get the hang of it." "So what's your deal, Elias? You're a designer, right?" We talked for hours, the conversation flowing like a river. Theo was curious, asking about my work, my favorite projects, the weird clients I dealt with. I learned he wasn't just a technician. He was studying to be an electrician, working nights to pay for classes. He had dreams of owning his own business someday, something small but his own. There was a fire in him, a quiet determination that made me want to know everything about him. But there was something else, too. A shadow that crossed his face when he mentioned his family. "They're good people," he said, stirring his coffee. "Just not big on the whole gay thing. Haven't talked to them in a while." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. My own parents had taken years to come around, and even now our calls were stiff, polite. "That's rough," I said. "You ever think about reaching out?" He shrugged, his eyes distant. "Sometimes. But it's hard to go back when you've built a life without them." The air between us grew heavy, and I reached for his hand, a reflex I didn't question. His fingers were warm, steady, and he didn't pull away. For a moment we just sat there, the noise of the coffee shop fading into the background. It was the kind of moment you want to bottle up and keep forever. We left the shop as the sun began to set, the sky streaked with pink and gold. Theo walked me to my car, and when we stopped, he looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "I'm glad you texted," he said, his voice low. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted, my heart pounding. "But I'm glad I did." He smiled, and before I could overthink it, he leaned in and kissed me. It was soft, tentative, but it felt like a promise. When he pulled back, I saw the same vulnerability in his eyes that I felt in my chest. This was real, and it was terrifying. Over the next few weeks, Theo became a constant in my life. We'd meet for coffee, take walks along the river, or just hang out in my apartment, talking until the early hours. He was funny, thoughtful, and fiercely independent, but there was a guardedness to him, a wall I couldn't quite breach. I didn't push, though not yet. I was too busy falling for him, too caught up in the way he made me feel alive again. But there were moments that gave me pause, like when he'd get a text and his face would darken, or when he'd change the subject if I asked about his past. I told myself it was nothing, that everyone has their secrets. But deep down, I knew there was something he wasn't telling me, something that could break us before we even had a chance to begin. One night, about a month after our first coffee date, Theo showed up at my apartment unannounced. It was late, past 10, and the rain was pounding against the windows. He was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes wild with something I couldn't name. "Elias," he said, his voice rough. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, my heart racing. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer right away, just stood in my living room, dripping onto the rug. I grabbed a towel from the bathroom and handed it to him, watching as he dried his face, his hands trembling slightly. "I didn't know where else to go," he said finally. "Talk to me," I said, sitting on the couch and patting the spot next to me. He sat, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken words. "It's my brother," he said at last. "Jake. He's in trouble. Big trouble." I listened as Theo spilled the story, his words tumbling out like a dam breaking. Jake, his younger brother, was 24 and still living in their hometown in Idaho. He'd gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd, drugs, petty crime, the kind of spiral that's hard to climb out of. Theo had been sending him money, trying to help, but Jake had called tonight, panicked, saying he owed someone dangerous a lot of cash. "I thought I could fix it," Theo said, his voice breaking. "But I can't. Not this time." I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "You don't have to do this alone," I said. "We'll figure it out." He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine, and I saw the weight he'd been carrying. Not just for Jake, but for himself, the years of running, of hiding parts of who he was to survive. I wanted to take it all away, to make him feel safe the way he made me feel. We stayed up all night, talking through options. Theo didn't have much savings, and neither did I, but I offered to help however I could. We decided to call Jake in the morning, to get the full story and make a plan. By the time the sun rose, Theo was asleep on my couch, his head resting on my shoulder. I watched him, my chest aching with how much I cared about him, how much I wanted to protect him from the world. The next day we called Jake. He was scared, his voice shaky over the phone, but he agreed to meet us in Portland. Theo and I drove to the bus station that evening, the tension between us palpable. When Jake stepped off the bus, I saw the resemblance immediately. Same blonde hair, same sharp jawline, but Jake's eyes were haunted, his frame too thin. He hugged Theo tightly, and I stood back, giving them space. "Elias, this is Jake," Theo said, his voice steady but strained. "Jake, this is someone important." Jake gave me a weak smile, and I nodded, feeling the weight of Theo's words. Someone important. It was the first time he'd acknowledged what we were to each other, and it hit me harder than I expected. We took Jake back to my apartment, where he crashed on the couch. Theo and I sat in the kitchen, whispering so we wouldn't wake him. "I don't know how to help him," Theo admitted, his voice barely audible. "I've tried everything." "You're doing enough," I said, cupping his face in my hands. "You're here. That's what matters." He leaned into my touch, and for the first time, I saw him let go, just a little of the walls he'd built. We kissed, slow and deep, and it felt like a vow. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. But the next morning, Jake was gone. No note, no explanation. Just an empty couch and a sinking feeling in my gut. Theo's face went pale when he realized, and I knew this was only the beginning of the storm. Theo was a wreck, pacing my apartment like a caged animal. "He's out there, Elias," he said, his voice tight with panic. "He's scared, and he's alone, and I let him down." "You didn't let him down," I said, grabbing his shoulders to stop him. "We'll find him. We'll bring him back." But finding Jake wasn't easy. Theo called every contact he had, from old friends in Idaho to local shelters in Portland. I posted on X, hoping someone might have seen him, but the responses were vague, unhelpful. Days turned into a week, and with each passing hour, Theo grew quieter, his hope fading like a dying ember. I did my best to keep him grounded. We'd cook dinner together, watch bad movies, anything to distract him from the gnawing worry. But I could see it eating at him, the guilt and fear that he'd failed his brother. I wanted to fix it, to make everything okay. But I was starting to realize some things can't be fixed, just held. One night, as we lay in bed, Theo turned to me, his voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this? Helping me, I mean, you don't even know Jake." I propped myself up on one elbow, looking into his eyes. "Because I know you," I said. "And I love you, Theo." The words hung in the air, heavy and true. I hadn't planned to say them, but they felt right, like they'd been waiting for the perfect moment. Theo's eyes softened, and he pulled me close, his lips finding mine in a kiss that said more than words ever could. "I love you too," he murmured against my skin, and my heart felt like it might burst. But love, as I'd learned the hard way, doesn't solve everything. The next morning, Theo got a call from a number he didn't recognize. It was Jake, his voice slurred and frantic, saying he was in trouble and needed help. He gave an address, a rundown motel on the edge of town, and then the line went dead. We drove there in silence, the weight of what we might find pressing down on us. The motel was as grim as I'd imagined, with flickering neon signs and a parking lot littered with broken glass. Jake was in room 12, curled up on a stained mattress, his face bruised and his eyes bloodshot. "Jake," Theo whispered, kneeling beside him. "What happened?" Jake's story came out in fragments. Debts, threats, a deal gone wrong. The people he owed money to weren't just dangerous. They were connected, the kind of people who didn't forgive or forget. Theo's face hardened as he listened, and I knew he was blaming himself. "We need to get you out of here," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Both of you." Theo looked at me, his eyes full of gratitude and fear. "Elias, this isn't your fight." "It is now," I said, and I meant it. We got Jake cleaned up and took him to a shelter that offered rehab programs. Theo was reluctant to leave him, but Jake insisted he'd be okay, that he needed to do this on his own. As we drove back to my apartment, Theo was quiet, his hand resting on mine. "I don't know how to thank you," he said finally. "You didn't have to do any of this." "I wanted to," I said, "because you're worth it, and so is Jake." For the first time in days, Theo smiled. A real smile, not the forced one he'd been wearing. It was small, but it was enough. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. Jake stayed in rehab, making slow but steady progress. Theo visited him every week, and I went with him when I could, watching their bond rebuild, fragile but growing stronger. Theo and I grew closer too, our relationship deepening into something I hadn't dared hope for. But the shadow of Jake's past lingered. One evening, as we were walking home from dinner, a car pulled up beside us, its windows tinted black. A man stepped out, his face hard and his voice colder. "Theo Carter," he said. You've got something that belongs to us. My stomach dropped. Theo's hand tightened around mine, but his voice was steady. I don't know what you're talking about. The man smirked, stepping closer. Your brother. He owes us, and you're gonna make it right. I wanted to run, to pull Theo away and pretend this wasn't happening. But Theo stood his ground, his jaw set. Jake's clean now. He's done with you. The man laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. You don't get to decide that. Before I could react, Theo stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. Leave him alone. Leave us alone. The man sized him up, then shrugged, as if it wasn't worth the fight. You've got a week, he said, getting back in the car. Pay up, or we find him. As the car sped off, Theo's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. I pulled him into a hug, my heart racing. We'll figure this out, I said, though I wasn't sure how. That night, we sat down with Jake over a video call. He was shaken but determined, insisting he'd handle it. I'm not letting them drag you into this, Theo, he said. I'll talk to the cops. Tell them everything. It was a risk, but Jake was resolute. With the help of a lawyer from the shelter, he turned himself in, giving the police enough information to start an investigation. It wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, tense conversations, and the constant fear that the men would come back. But Theo and I faced it together, our love a quiet strength that held us steady. In the end, Jake's cooperation led to arrests, and the threat faded like a bad dream. He stayed in Portland, working a steady job and rebuilding his life. Theo finished his electrician certification, and I took on bigger design projects, my confidence growing with every step we took together. One spring evening, as we stood on the banks of the Willamette, Theo turned to me, his eyes bright with something new, hope. You changed everything, he said, taking my hand. I came to install your internet, but you fixed something deeper. I laughed, pulling him close. You did the same for me. We kissed as the sun set, the river reflecting the colors of a life we'd built together. One of love, resilience, and the courage to keep going, no matter what. The note I'd seen that first day, scribbled on a work order, had been right. Love rewires the heart. And ours were connected now, stronger than any signal, ready for whatever came next.